My parents sued me for refusing to sell my apartment to fund my sister's divorce, so I taught them a lesson they'll regret. It was 7:15 in the morning, River North, Chicago. The coffee in my hand was hot, but the air in my condo was cold, quiet, and expensive, just the way I liked it. Then the buzzer rang. It wasn't a friend. It was a process server. I signed for the thick envelope, ripped it open while standing in my foyer, and stared at the legal header. Filial responsibility support. My parents, Gary and Susan, were suing me. They weren't asking for help. They were suing me for monthly maintenance because they claimed they were destitute. Why? Because my sister Gabriella's divorce was costing them a fortune. They wanted my money to pay for her mistakes. The audacity didn't make me scream. It made me freeze. I didn't throw the papers. I didn't scream. Panic is an inefficiency I couldn't afford, so I skipped it and went straight to mitigation. I sat down at my glass dining table and engaged risk assessment mode. The lawsuit claimed I had made a verbal contract to support my parents in their old age in exchange for the necessities of life they provided during my childhood. Food, shelter, clothing. They were actually trying to invoice me for raising me. They claimed my refusal to sell my home to fund their legal battles constituted a breach of this imaginary contract. It was a nuclear strike on my financial future launched by the people who were supposed to be my safety net. Most daughters would call their mother crying, begging for an explanation. I opened my laptop. My parents were terrible with technology. Years ago, they had set me up as the administrator for the family cloud drive because they couldn't be bothered to remember passwords. They had forgotten I held the keys. I logged in. I didn't just browse. I executed a hostile takeover. I downloaded 5 years of tax returns, credit card statements, and bank transfers. I secured every single PDF that detailed their spending habits. Then I changed the passwords. I locked them out of their own digital lives. I looked around my living room. To them, this condo in River North was just an asset. It was a pile of money they could liquidate to solve their problem. But to me, this wasn't real estate. It was a fortress. I walked to the wall and pressed my hand against the cold plaster. This wall wasn't made of drywall and paint. It was made of rice and beans. For 4 years, I ate nothing else. While Gabriella was getting weekly spray tans and a nose job for her 16th birthday because of a supposed deviated septum, I was walking to work in the snow to save bus fare. While they poured thousands into her pageant dresses, betting on her marrying rich, I was hoarding pennies like a dragon. Every square foot of this place represented a party I missed, a trip I didn't take, a luxury I denied myself. I built this silence. I bought this peace. It was the only place in the world where no one could tell me I wasn't enough or that I was too boring, or that I existed solely to service the family image. This condo was a physical manifestation of my survival. Selling it wouldn't just be a financial loss. It would be a return to the chaos. It would mean tearing down the only safe place I had ever known to build a shelter for the people who left me out in the cold. I looked at the downloaded files on my screen. They wanted a war over resources. Fine. But they had forgotten one thing. I was the risk analyst, and they were a liability I was about to liquidate. I drove out to Naperville the next evening. They called it a settlement meeting. I called it reconnaissance. My parents' house was a sprawling colonial with perfect landscaping and a driveway full of leased luxury cars. It looked like the American dream. I knew it was a house of cards. I walked into the living room, and it was like stepping onto a stage set. My mother, Susan, was wearing a cashmere cardigan that probably cost more than my first car. My father, Gary, was pouring scotch into crystal tumblers. And there was Gabriella, the golden child, curled up on the white sofa sobbing into a silk handkerchief. She looked up when I entered, her eyes perfectly rimmed with red, her makeup somehow still flawless. "Alexis," she sniffled. "Thank God you're here. We need to fix this." My father didn't offer me a drink. He gestured to a stiff armchair in the corner. "Have a seat," he said. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." I sat down, placing my purse on my lap like a shield. I expected an apology. I expected them to say the lawsuit was a mistake, a panic move. Instead, my mother clasped her hands and smiled that tight, terrifying smile she used when she was about to ask for a favor she felt entitled to. "We know the legal route is aggressive," she said smoothly. "But we need you to understand the gravity of the situation. Blake is enforcing the prenuptial agreement. He is trying to leave Gabriella with nothing. If she doesn't have the best legal representation, the family brand will be ruined. We can't have her living in a rental, Alexis. What would people say? I stared at her. The family brand? That's what this was about. Not Gabriella's well-being, the optics. And you expect me to sell my home to protect your image? I asked, my voice flat. Gary sighed, the sound of a man burdened by an unreasonable employee. It's not just about image, Alexis. It's about strategy. You have equity. We need liquidity. It's a temporary reallocation of assets. Once Gabriella gets her settlement, we'll pay you back. With interest, if you insist. I looked at Gabriella. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her phone, probably checking engagement on her latest sad girl post. And then it hit me. The realization was so sharp, it almost drew blood. I wasn't their daughter. I was their insurance policy. For 29 years, I had wondered why I was the boring one. Why they pushed me to study finance while Gabriella took acting classes. Why they praised my frugality but mocked my clothes. They weren't teaching me responsibility. They were breeding a safety net. They knew Gabriella was high risk. They knew their lifestyle was unsustainable. So they raised me to be the steady, uncomplaining resource they could harvest when the winter came. I was the glass child. They looked right through me to see the golden reflection of themselves in Gabriella. I'm not selling, I said. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Susan's smile vanished. You are selfish, she hissed. We gave you everything. We made you who you are. You owe us. Rising from that chair felt like breaking gravity. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just looked at them, three strangers performing a tragedy in a house they couldn't afford, and I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, sealing the tomb behind me. The wind in Naperville was cold, but for the first time in my life, the cold didn't bother me. It felt like clarity. I drove back to the city with my jaw set so hard my teeth ached. My phone was blowing up with texts from my mother, guilt trips about family loyalty, accusations of betrayal, threats of disownment. I put it on Do Not Disturb. I had work to do. I hired a lawyer named Reynolds, a man whose smile was as sharp as his suit. He filed a motion to dismiss based on improper venue and lack of merit, but that was just the opening salvo. The real war was happening on my dining room table. For the next 3 nights, I didn't sleep. I became a forensic accountant in my own home. I combed through the gigabytes of data I had downloaded. Every credit card statement, every bank transfer, every Venmo transaction. It was a labyrinth of financial incompetence. I saw the leases for cars they couldn't afford. I saw the 5-star vacations put on credit cards with 20% interest rates. I saw the business expenses for Gary's consulting firm that were actually payments for country club memberships and spa days. But then I found it. The smoking gun. It wasn't just incompetence. It was embezzlement. My parents were trustees for my grandmother's small estate money that was supposed to be held in trust for all the grandchildren's education. The account was empty. Drained. And the transfers didn't go to schools. They went to a shell company registered to Gabriella. They had been funneling the family's future into her influencer career, buying followers, paying for brand trips, funding her lifestyle to make her look successful enough to snag a rich husband. They weren't destitute. They were criminals. They were technically bankrupt because they had stolen from the family pot and spent it on smoke and mirrors. I sat back, the blue light of the laptop illuminating my face. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, mathematical certainty. They had sued me for support because the well had run dry, and they needed a new source to tap before the fraud was discovered. I drafted a forensic report. It was 30 pages of charts, graphs, and undeniable proof. I wasn't just fighting a lawsuit anymore. I was building a prison cell. The wind howled outside my window, rattling the glass of my fortress. Winter had arrived in Chicago, and it was going to be a long, cold season for the people who thought they could use me as kindling. I printed the report, the pages warm in my hands. The professional escalation was complete. Now I just had to wait for the right moment to drop the hammer. Reynolds called me on Thursday. His voice, usually smooth and confident, was tight. "Alexis, we need to talk." I have the discovery documents from Blake's legal team. I put my coffee down. What is it? Did they find the shell company? No. It's worse. Or better, depending on how cynical you are. He paused. Blake isn't just enforcing the prenup because of irreconcilable differences. He's invoking the morality clause. Specifically, the subsection regarding paternity fraud. My hand froze over my keyboard. Paternity fraud. Yes. Gabriella isn't just getting divorced. She's pregnant. And the paternity test Blake's lawyers subpoenaed confirms the father isn't Blake. The silence stretched between us thick and heavy. Then who is it? I asked, though a sick feeling in my stomach told me I already knew. It's Logan. Blake's younger brother. I stared at the wall of my office, the city skyline blurring into gray static. Logan, the brother Blake had bailed out of rehab 3 times. The brother who had always looked at Gabriella a little too long at family dinners. It was a dynasty-ending scandal, an incestuous betrayal that would humiliate one of the most powerful families in Chicago. And my parents knew. Suddenly, the pieces slammed into place. The desperation, the lawsuit, the claim that they were destitute. They weren't trying to maintain a lifestyle. They were trying to buy silence. They needed hush money. They needed to move Gabriella out of the country, set her up somewhere quiet, pay off anyone who might talk before the news broke, and destroyed their social standing forever. They were willing to sacrifice my future, my home, my security, my life to cover up the fact that their golden child had detonated a nuclear bomb inside her marriage. It was the ultimate normalization of cruelty. They had convinced themselves that destroying me was a necessary evil to save the family honor. They viewed my stability not as my achievement, but as their reserve fund. I felt a cold fury settle in my bones. They weren't just bad parents. They were accomplices to a moral crime, and they had tried to make me an accessory after the fact. Send me the files, I told Reynolds. All of them. The paternity test, the prenup, the morality clause. I hung up and walked to the window. Below me, the city moved in its relentless rhythm, indifferent to the rot at the heart of my family. I had spent my life trying to be good enough, trying to be seen. Now I realized they had seen me perfectly clearly. They saw me as the sacrifice, the scapegoat to be burned so the golden child could rise from the ashes. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. The scapegoat had the receipts, and she wasn't burning alone. The deposition room smelled like lemon polish and stale coffee. It was a windowless box designed to make people uncomfortable, but I felt right at home. I sat next to Reynolds, my hands folded on the table, watching my parents across the expanse of mahogany. They looked confident, smug even. They had dressed the part of the grieving destitute elders, my mother in a modest gray suit, my father hunching his shoulders to look frailer than he was. Their lawyer, a man who looked like he chased ambulances for sport, started his opening statement about the sacred bond of family and the tragedy of abandonment. He was talking about moral obligation. He was talking about how I had benefited from their generosity for 18 years and now refused to pay it forward. Gary nodded along, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disappointment, as if I were a wayward child who just needed a timeout to understand the error of my ways. They really believed they were going to win. They thought they could shame me into submission because that's how they had controlled me my entire life. They didn't realize that shame is a currency, and I had stopped trading in it years ago. Reynolds didn't interrupt. He let them finish their performance. When the room finally went quiet, he didn't open a legal binder. He looked at me. It was my turn. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out 2 manila envelopes. I slid the first one across the table. It stopped perfectly in front of my father. "That is a forensic audit of the family trust," I said. My voice was calm, almost bored. "It details 342 transactions over the last 5 years. It shows how you liquidated Grandma's estate money that was legally designated for education and funneled it into a shell corporation registered to Gabriella. It shows the wire transfers for the lease on the Porsche, the trips to Cabo, the bot farms you hired to inflate her follower count. You aren't destitute, Gary. You're felons. You're technically bankrupt because you embezzled your own future to buy likes on Instagram." Gary's face went from flush to ash in 3 seconds. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His lawyer grabbed the file, flipping through the pages, his eyes widening as he saw the receipts. But I wasn't done. I slid the second envelope across the table. This one was for my mother. And this, I said, is the reason Blake is destroying you. It's a copy of the paternity test from the divorce discovery files. My mother froze. Her hand hovered over the envelope like it was radioactive. She knew. She had known the whole time. Open it, I said. She didn't. She just stared at me, her eyes filling with a terror I had never seen before. So I continued. It confirms that Gabriella's baby doesn't belong to her husband. It belongs to Logan, his brother. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of their lungs. Their lawyer stopped reading. He looked at his clients, then at the envelope, then back at his clients with a look of pure horror. He realized he wasn't fighting a support case. He was standing on a landmine. You sued me for support because you needed hush money, I said. You needed to pay off the people who know or move Gabriella somewhere nobody would ask questions. You were willing to liquidate my life, my home, my savings, my future to cover up an incestuous scandal that would destroy your social standing. You didn't come for my money because you were hungry. You came because you were drowning in your own lies. Susan burst into tears. It wasn't the pretty, delicate crying she used at parties. It was ugly, guttural sobbing. We had to protect her, she wailed. She's your sister, Alexis. This will kill her. If this gets out, we lose everything. We lose our friends. We lose our standing. Please, you can't do this. I looked at her, this woman who had looked through me for 29 years. I looked at my father, who was staring at the table defeated. They were begging now. The power had flipped so fast they had whiplash. They were waiting for me to be the good daughter, the one who cleans up the mess, the one who sacrifices herself to keep the golden child shining. If you proceed with this lawsuit, I said, I will submit both of these files into public record as evidence of your financial status and the reason for your alleged insolvency. The choice is yours. You can drop the suit with prejudice and sign a non-contact order, or you can explain to a judge and the press why you stole from a dead woman to hide a paternity scandal. Susan reached across the table, her hand trembling. Alexis, please. We did it for the family. We love you. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. No, you don't, I said. You love the insurance policy. But you made a tactical error. You sacrificed the wrong daughter. I walked to the door. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard my mother sobbing my name, but it sounded like a ghost story. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The air was breathable again. The deposition was over, and so was their hold on me. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice 72 hours later. Reynolds called me to confirm the paperwork had been filed. My parents signed the non-contact order without a fight. They didn't have a choice. It was the most expensive autograph of their lives, bought with the currency of their own humiliation. The aftermath played out with the predictable efficiency of a market correction. The house in Naperville was listed the following week. It was a fire sale. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental near the airport, far away from the country club and the prying eyes of the neighbors they had spent decades trying to impress. Gabriella's divorce was finalized quickly. Blake was ruthless. She walked away with nothing but her clothes and the baby she tried to pass off as a dynasty heir. She is living with her parents now. 3 narcissists trapped in a small rented box, blaming the world for the ruin they manufactured. I don't check up on them. I don't look at their social media. They are simply bad assets that have been written off the books. I sat in my condo on a Friday night. It was quiet. The wind off Lake Michigan pressed against the glass, but inside the air was still. I opened my laptop one last time. I pulled up the spreadsheet I had kept in my head for 29 years, the ledger of every slight, every dollar stolen, every time they looked through me to see my sister. For a long time, I thought walking away was a failure. Society tells us that blood is a binding contract. We are taught that you can't default on family, no matter how toxic the debt becomes. But I realized that sometimes blood isn't a bond, it's a parasite. Cutting it off wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of medical necessity. I had to amputate the connection to save the patient. And the patient was me. By letting go of the bloodline that was draining me, I finally found the person they never wanted me to be. I found myself. I looked at the file labeled debts. I didn't archive it. I highlighted the cells and hit delete. The screen blinked and the data vanished. The balance was zero. I closed the laptop. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, thousands of other fortresses against the dark. I wasn't the glass child anymore. I was solid. I was secure. And for the first time in my life, I was free.